Hey, what's up guys, it's OSG back with a new series. This is the start of the best arcade parts ever series, and we're kicking it off with the Sega Mega Drive. Why not the C64 or Amiga I hear you say? And that's a good valid question. And my answer is that I built this channel on all the systems, and it's been brought to my attention that I'm sort of neglecting the other systems, and also the subs who sub for those systems. So here we are with the best Sega Mega Drive arcade ports ever. Airbus Two is a great side-scrolling shoot 'em up from Kenneco. It's very much like UN Squadron in looks and gameplay, with some pretty awesome boss fights and great music. The Mega Drive port is so close to the arcade it's hard to tell the difference. The music and sound effects are also on par with the arcade port too. They did a great job here. Next is Alien Storm, and this was a Sega classic in the arcades. It was a great multiplayer game that had some of the weirdest creatures we had ever seen in one game. The Mega Drive version is one I remember most, as I actually got it with my Mega Drive as part of Mega Games 3 with Super Monaco and Thunderblade. It's a great game that me and my mates played all the time. Back in the day, games didn't get much bigger than Altered Beast. Everyone played it and loved it. Sadly, it's one of those games that didn't age well, and now it isn't loved by many. As I said, it hasn't aged well and it's not a loved Mega Drive game anymore, but that doesn't stop it being a great port. Again, it's so close to the arcade in every way, and just about every Mega Drive owner had this game.
Welcome to your doom.
This is Chelnov Atomic Runner, and this is a constant scrolling run and gun game that is one of the most addictive games I have ever played. The concept is pretty simple. Get the guy to the end of the level in one piece while picking up some funky weapons and fighting all kinds of bad guys. The Mega Drive version is one of those rare games that actually outdoes its counterpart. This is miles more polished than the arcade port and is definitely the definitive version of Atomic Runner. Before we had the Avengers films, the best option other than comics was Captain America and the Avengers on arcade. This was and still is a great beat 'em up where you can play as a number of Avengers in a bid to beat the Red Skull. The Mega Drive version, while not being as good as the arcade, is still a great scrolling beat 'em up, and even now my son enjoys playing this and he's the biggest ever Avengers fan. Crude Buster was a side-scrolling beat 'em up that I personally never got into. I think this was mainly down to the fact that Bad Dudes was so much better, so when I had money to put into the machine, this one rarely got a play from me. The Mega Drive version, known as Two Crude Dudes, actually looks better than the arcade I think, and I did play this quite a bit on my Mega Drive. It was especially good in 2-player mode. Darius 2 is one of the best arcade shooters out there, with the wide multi-screen arcade giving it the edge over some of the smaller single screens. This game is awesome, and as I'm a shoot 'em up fan, I love it. The Mega Drive version, while obviously losing the widescreen aspect, is a solid and great port. It's right up there with the best shoot 'em ups on the system and a solid part of the arcade classic. I'm sure that this game needs no introduction. Golden Axe was and still is one of the most iconic arcade games ever made. The game was a favourite with me and my mates in the arcade and munched through all of our pocket money week after week. The Mega Drive version is also one of the best Mega Drive games ever made too, with the same great music and gameplay as the arcade. Sega really knew how to make a great beat 'em up. Everyone knows Ghouls and Ghosts, and anyone who played it knows how hard it is, but it's also a great looking game with some of the most memorable music in the arcades. The Mega Drive port is class. In fact, I like playing it more than I do the arcade version. Shame though that this was eclipsed by the SNES Ghouls and Ghosts, which is absolutely awesome. Hellfire on arcade is one of the hardest shoot 'em ups you will ever play, but what else would you expect from Toplan? It's got a great weapon system that you can switch between weapons depending on what enemies you are fighting. The Mega Drive version, while not being as hard as the arcade, is still a very tough game, but it's also one of the best shoot 'em up conversions on the system, as you can see. If you love shooters like me, then this is a must play game. Marble Madness is a puzzle game that was massive in the arcades. It was played with a rollerball controls, which I could never get the hang of as a kid. The level design on this game is brilliant and the physics are awesome. The Mega Drive version is an absolute masterclass in how to convert an arcade to home system. I actually find this version a lot better for me as it uses a control pad, which I can get to grips with a lot easier than the rollerballs. Mega Twins is a platform game much in the style of Wonder Boy and Monsterland. While it's not one of my favourite games, it's still nice looking and plays well. The Mega Drive version is just as nice looking, although I think the sprites are a little bit bigger than the arcade and even a bit sharper too. It's a decent port of a mediocre game. Mercs was and still is one of my favourite run and gun games in the arcade. It's so fast and is a joy to play even today, and even though I've completed it about 1,000,000 times, I still fire this up regularly. The Mega Drive version, while not looking as good, still has a great gameplay, and I love that they stayed true to the arcade even with their aspect ratio. This game just wouldn't be the same in 4:3 ratio. Midnight Resistance is one of my favourite arcade games of all time. In fact, I like it so much I bought the arcade controls for my cabinet, but I still haven't fit them yet. It's such an iconic game that for me will never ever grow old. The Mega Drive version is the best of the home ports, and I placed it second in my comparison video. The only thing that makes this below the arcade is the controls, as it's best to have a directional joystick for this game. Mba Hung Time is one of those arcade cabinets that took up the big corner spaces in the amusements. This was one of the best looking games of its time, and although us in the UK aren't that into our basketball games, this one still got played all the time.
Johnson goes up, lays it up, incredible.
The Mega Drive version, as you can see, is nowhere near the arcade for smooth, crisp looking graphics, but that's more than made up for with the great sound and gameplay.
He shoots! He's heating up! Incredible!
NBA Jam was in my video on arcade machines that made an absolute fortune, and it's no wonder why. This is maybe the best basketball game ever made.
Rejected!
NBA Jam on the Mega Drive is every bit as good as the arcade, and they even got the graphics right in this one. Like I say, we aren't really a basketball nation, but I defy anyone who says this isn't a great Mega Drive game.
Head fake, head fake. Puts up a brick. The turnover, he's on fire.
Rolling Thunder was one of the most played games in my local arcade. This game, however, I never really saw much, which is surprising as it's a good sequel. The gameplay and graphics are even better than the first game, but the music is horrible. The Mega Drive version is as good as the arcade, if not slightly better, as the music is a bit more toned down. Still though, I much prefer to play the original. Samurai Showdown was massive in the arcade, but it was never one what interested me. I was never a Street Fighter type kid, so as this is much the same, it had no appeal to me. Saying that, it's a great looking game with some fast, smooth gameplay. The Mega Drive is a good attempt, but sadly, although it plays nearly the same, it lacks the smooth, crisp looks of the arcade. Again though, not one that I would really want to play. Shuttle Dancer is Shinobi's second outing on arcade, and this time he's brought his dog. It's a great game without a doubt, and it is a truly iconic game that is still loved by many today. The Mega Drive version, as you would expect, is excellent. In fact, I think it's better than the arcade, and there may be a good reason for this, as it's not strictly a part of the game. Still though, it's one of my favourite Shinobi games ever, second only to Shinobi 3. Slap Fight on arcade is one of those top-down shoot 'em ups that will has you playing for ages, and that's for two reasons. One, it's rock hard, and two, the gameplay and music are excellent. This really is a timeless classic. The Mega Drive took the arcade classic and revamped it with some really nice music that stayed true to the original, and also some nifty little voice samples for pickups, making this a really good port. Snow Bros on arcade is one that passed me by at the time. It's a bubble bobble type game, so maybe that's why, as nothing came close to that game for me. I have played it later though, and it's a great entertaining game. The Mega Drive version is probably the most arcade perfect game on the list, and you get the same great gameplay and music and looks in your home. I actually have played this one quite a lot on my handheld Mega Drive. Another iconic arcade game here was Strider. This game was literally everywhere when I was young, and the music was always heard above others in the arcade. While for me it hasn't aged well, it's still a great game to play from time to time. The Mega Drive version is every bit as good as the arcade, and it's one that most Mega Drive owners will have owned back in the day. It's a really good port, but as with Alter Beast, for me it's lost its appeal now. Truxton on arcade is my favourite top-down shoot 'em up ever. It's rock hard as you would expect from a top-land game, but there's just something about it that keeps me coming back for more torture. The Mega Drive version is a good port that stayed true to the arcade. They kept the aspect ratio too, which is so important to this game, and they also, dare I say, made it a little bit easier. But make no mistake, this still isn't an easy game. Virtual racing on arcade was a game that was never meant to be. It was developed as a proof of concept to test Sega's new Model 1 platform. The proof of concept was so good that it was developed into a full game, spawning full-size sit-down cabinets and some of the most realistic racing we have ever experienced. Two years later it was ported to the Mega Drive, and what a port it is. Obviously, as you can see, looks wise it's nowhere near the arcade, but gameplay wise it's great. I regularly fire this up and play it, it's just so good. Warden is another game that I missed back in the day, and I think that's because the similarities to Ghosts and Goblins made this a game that if you could get on Ghosts and Goblins you would not spend your money on this one, as it's just not as good. The Mega Drive version, as you would expect from a scrolling platformer, is great, and it's one that I think that most people's first experience will have been with Warden. As I said, it's no Ghosts and Goblins, but it's still a good game in its own right. Right, that's it from me. Let me know in the comments below if I've missed any games that you think should have made this list, and remember to hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already. Until next time, this is OSG, signing out.